Hello and welcome to SDPN's 2023-2024 NBA season previews. Today, we're taking a look at our first of three Texas teams, that is the Dallas Mavericks. Luka Doncic has started to apply pressure on the Mavericks front office to build a contender around him. They took a huge swing last season, trading for Kyrie Irving, but ultimately it resulted in a disastrous finish to their season, and they didn't even make the playoffs. The Mavs, however, were busy in the offseason to make sure that didn't happen again, almost entirely revamping their roster around Irving and Doncic. Will that be enough to make a difference? Let's dive in. But first, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more NBA content. The season is almost here, and we have tons of great NBA videos coming your way to get you prepped for what should be an awesome season. The Mavericks were sort of spinning their wheels last season. Luka Doncic is obviously an MVP level star, and because of that, Dallas has completed the hard part of the equation. But the challenge for the Mavericks has been surrounding Luka with complementary pieces to make this whole thing work. And so far, it really hasn't been great. The Kristaps Porzingis experiment cost them a bunch of draft equity that set them back, and ultimately, the fit wasn't as seamless as they expected, and Porzingis couldn't stay healthy in the important moments for it to even matter. They even changed coaches, moving on from longtime Mavericks coach Rick Carlisle and hiring Jason Kidd in his place, and that itself has had mixed results. The Mavs were an elite defensive team in the 2021-2022 season under Kidd, but last season they were never able to find that magic, and if anything, probably got worse in that department when they traded for the disgruntled star in Kyrie. Kyrie and Luka only played in 16 games together to finish the year, and they were dynamic offensively, with Dallas boasting a 121 offensive rating in the 400 minutes they played together. Those are legitimately dominant offensive numbers, and in all honesty, Irving is the perfect off-ball player next to Luka. He can attack tilted defenses, he can maneuver his way through tight spots, he can work off of the advantages Luka creates while also creating advantages for himself. Irving can alleviate pressure off of Luka as a creator. He can give them more time to rest if they decide to stagger them, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Mavericks had a top 5 offense next season. It would actually shock me if they had anything less than that. But defensively, it was a train wreck. After the All-Star break, Dallas boasted the 26th worst defense in the league, allowing over 118 points per 100 possessions. With Luka and Kyrie on the floor, they did much of the same. They couldn't stop a nosebleed, and it was because they didn't have a lick of wing defense or size or really anything that could constitute a good defensive team. Because of that, Dallas went 7-15 for the final stretch of the season and didn't even qualify for a play-in spot. It was a fun basketball team to watch, maybe a little bit because it was disastrous, but it didn't mean anything because they were a completely one-sided team. What Luka and Kyrie need to thrive is multiple wing defenders surrounding them, as well as legitimate rim protection and size in the front court. And despite limited flexibility, the Mavericks did a pretty good job of addressing those issues in the offseason. First and foremost, they inked Kyrie Irving to a 3-year max extension for $120 million. Look, there's no question that Irving comes with baggage on a number of fronts, but Dallas already made its bed by trading for him, and now they at least have him signed up for the next 2+ years to see how this new experiment will work. Ultimately, Irving only played in half of his games in a Nets uniform, and his time there was mirrored in controversy and injury, but his talent and fit next to Doncic is not debatable. And again, Dallas really didn't have a choice in extending him, especially after trading picks and players to get him. They also inked big man Dwight Powell to a 3-year, $12 million deal. Powell is a pretty polarizing player as far as Mavericks fans go, but ultimately they need his size in the middle, especially when they still have limited options on that end. They tried to address some of that by trading for Richaun Holmes on draft night, the Kings big man who had fell out of the rotation for Sacramento last season. Holmes can theoretically be a really impressive big next to Luka and Kyrie as a short roll creator and finisher, and he's going to rack up easy points playing next to those guys. He's not the biggest center, standing at 6'9", and he's not a real rim protector or shot blocker because of it, so he doesn't really address their defensive issues. But again, another big body that they can throw out there, and it didn't take much at all to acquire him. Maybe the big man to be most intrigued by on this Mavericks roster is a rookie, their lottery selection from this year's draft out of Duke, Derek Lively. Lively has gotten comps to Tyson Chandler, and that will excite Mavericks fans. He is an elite rim runner who is an incredible defender and mover in space. He can block and deter shots at the rim. He is excellent at switching out onto guards and ultimately should eventually become an elite defensive stopper in the league. He's still a rookie, and defensively there might not be a harder position to learn in the NBA than center, but a hot take, I think there's a chance Lively can start for the Mavericks next season. All they need him to do is contest shots at the rim and serve as their backline help on defense. Offensively, he's going to get tons of open looks at and around the basket, and he can finish there as a vertical spacing threat. He has to continue to expand his repertoire offensively and add an outside jumper, but I think even as a rookie, there's a legit route for consistent minutes for him, even despite the uphill battle ahead for him. So that's their main big man rotation, and obviously Maxi Kleber will get some run in that department as a small ball 5 and floor spacer. As far as their wing defense issues, well, Dallas did what they could to address that as well. Their biggest free agency signing was inking Grant Williams to a 4-year, $54 million deal. I really like this signing for the Mavericks because Williams is a big wing who can guard multiple positions and should address their defensive issues. Besides, he's a low usage wing, which makes him perfect to slot next to other stars, a good complementary piece offensively that can make plays for himself and others, and is a good career shooter, hitting on nearly 38% of his threes in his first 4 seasons in Boston. Grant will probably start for this Mavericks team alongside Kyrie and Luka, and I think ultimately he's going to be a big difference maker for them. I don't think he needs to expand his game in any sort of way. He just needs to be the same type of player he was in Boston, and I think he'll be more productive in Dallas' system because of it. In addition to Grant, the Mavericks signed Derrick Jones Jr. to shore up their wing rotation. Jones isn't the shooter that Grant is. In fact, he's not a shooter at all, but he's a long, athletic wing that can defend multiple positions and roll to the basket. He's a high flyer, so he provides some vertical spacing for the Mavericks, and I think he's a fine swing piece for their rotation. Ultimately, there's a world in which Derrick Jones thrives in the dunker spot next to guys like Luka and Kyrie, and again, you don't need to have tons of creation next to those guys, just guys who can finish plays, and he and Grant can do that. Beside those additions, they also shored up their guard rotation by adding Seth Curry and Dante Exum to the team this summer. In Curry, he is reuniting with Doncic in Dallas. He had the best seasons of his career in a Mavericks uniform next to Luka, so maybe that happens again. He's very small, and that's going to hurt them on defense, but he's still an elite shooter who can space the floor for them. And with Curry's addition, it also makes it much easier for the Mavericks to explore trade options for Tim Hardaway Jr., who they've seemingly tried to move all summer. In Exum, the Mavericks are taking a big swing on a former lottery pick who has matured his game playing in Australia, and hopefully, as a big, defensive-minded guard, he can provide quality minutes off the bench for the Mavericks. Still to be determined if he actually cracks the rotation, though. They also drafted Canadian Olivier Maxence Prosper, also known as Omax, a long, rangy guard / wing who is a good athlete that can attack tilted defenses and score off of the ball. He still needs to show that he's improved as a shooter, and ultimately that'll be his main pathway to minutes this season, but he's an intriguing guard with defensive upside to keep an eye on. But the player I'm most intrigued to watch this season on the Mavs will be wing Josh Green. I already discussed what I'm looking forward to watching from the Aussie wing this season in my offseason series titled The Leap, but he could be a huge X factor for the Mavericks this season. He is a solid wing defender who is strong and can guard multiple positions. He is an excellent connector on offense who is always making the extra pass and is a great athlete who can attack tilted defenses and make plays from advantages Luka and Kyrie create. If I had to make a bet, I'd say Green starts next season for the Mavericks alongside Luka, Kyrie, and Grant, and I think that's the right call, especially because of the improvements that he's made as a shooter. Last season, he shot 40%, albeit on just over 2 attempts a game, and I think if given more opportunity, he can hover around 36 to 38% with more attempts. With his versatility on defense, the way he complements the Mavericks stars on offense, and the way he's grown as a shooter, Green is the ultimate swing piece for this team next year. If the Mavs want to have any chance of competing, and dare I say contending, it's because Green has come into his own as a good 3-and-D player. That's how important he is for them. By that same token, Jaden Hardy is going to be interesting to watch next season as well. As a rookie, he showed off an ability to score the ball and explode in games, and I think he has a real shot at rotation minutes next season, especially if the Mavericks want to continue to lean on an explosive offense. But ultimately, the success of this team will come down to two things. The first being defense. If this team can somehow find a way to be an average or above average team on that end, then they have the offensive talent to be a playoff team and potentially even contenders. If they're anything below that, they will struggle to win games immensely. And while they improved defensively in the summer through a few of their additions, mainly Lively, Grant, and Jones Jr., they still have a long way to go before actually being a solid team on that end. The second factor is availability. As I mentioned, Kyrie is always going to be a question mark, and how available and tuned in he is will be a huge factor, not only for the Mavericks this season, but for their future as it relates to Luka. The same thing applies to Luka, who is reportedly dealing and playing through a leg injury he sustained last season and even commented on during the FIBA World Cup. Ultimately, how healthy and bought in those two are will be massive factors. And that's going to be huge for Dallas's future too. The time is ticking on Luka's patience with this team. They failed the Porzingis experiment, they failed to retain Jalen Brunson, and now they're banking on a somewhat flawed and unproven roster and a secondary star that can best be described as flaky. The Mavericks are not standing on solid foundation with Luka, and they probably don't have long before he starts to question what the future holds for him in Dallas. Regardless, the Mavericks this season are projected at 45.5 wins, and I think that's a fair assessment of how much they can win this season. I think I'm going to go under because of the defensive concerns I still have for this team and the fact that they're banking on fringe rotation pieces to play a solid chunk of their minutes. Ultimately, I think the Mavericks are a good starting center away from being a really dangerous team, and they probably are going to try to address that at some point this season. Some people are saying the Mavericks can be contenders this year, and while I don't necessarily agree, they definitely have the top-end talent to compete with other contenders. It's just about how those rotational pieces, mainly Grant, Lively, and Green, will pan out for them this season, and if their stars can stay healthy. But what do you think? Can the Mavericks actually contend this season? Let us know in the comments, and as always, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. We'll see you guys later.